Organisations, right, okay. Minutes of the previous meeting, anybody spotted any typos or mistakes? People have to agree the minutes of the previous meeting? Excellent. Moving on, you have my update in writing. I don't propose to add too much, just two very quick things I just wanted to mention. One is we're hoping any day now for notices to come in for Net Zero Teesside. You may have seen if anybody's been over to Southgate recently that Alphas are on site doing some test piling ahead of construction starting in the coming weeks. And then obviously there's the most recent thing, which obviously couldn't go into the papers, which is about British Steel yesterday. There's a lot of news coming out of British Steel, which I know is hugely worrying for everybody, and sadly does look like it will impact to some extent on Teesside and the Skinning Grove and Lackenby mills, but thankfully relative to Scunthorpe that impact is hoping will be relatively minor. Had some meetings yesterday with government officials on the next step. Looks like government is stepping up various groups to support the business and the individuals affected and the potential fallout from that, and we've offered at the Tees Valley end our support both for the rolling mills on Teesside, but actually any support we can provide to the Scunthorpe end as well, given our sad experience in 2015 of how this played out last time. So I'm sure we'll keep everybody up to date as that develops. But yeah, it's another worrying time for the steel industry in the UK. Sorry, Brenda, yeah?
Could I just continue to your update on the careers?
Yes, for sure.
I think this is a fantastic initiative. However, I think we need to acknowledge the decline in career support over the years in education. You know, one time there was a dedicated careers teacher in most of the secondary schools. There were careers advisors going in on a fairly regular basis at certain times. As far as I'm aware, none of that happens now. So it's good that this is there, but it only touches the tip of the iceberg, I feel, and hopefully this will grow. I don't necessarily think a combined authority should necessarily be responsible for careers education. So it's good that support is there, but I think we need to try to do something to get more support for our young people as they're leaving school.
Well, that's a good point, Brenda. And also the rhetoric coming out from the central government looks pretty positive around kind of re-establishment of some kind of more nationally focused career services, which will help reintroduce some of that. And obviously some of the proposals in this paper around the investment fund refreshes, some of that is also allocated, some to careers, but also actually to the wider skills agenda as well. For young people needs, obviously we've got the Trailblazer programme that we're trying to adopt today as well. So yeah, you're absolutely right, that's not going to solve the problem. We need to do it, but there's a much bigger problem that hopefully central government will address. And if it falls through on its plans that it's announced, then they'll get my support because it's absolutely needed. As you say, Brenda. Any other comments or questions for me on my paper? Okay, well, we'll note that, if that's okay, and we'll move on to the governance and appointments paper. I'm told that there's been a very minor revised version issued, specifically in, there were basically typos and recommendations 3 and 4. So hopefully you've got the updated paper which talks about, yeah, it's been reissued and republished. Item 3 should read the appointment of South Tees Development Corporation Audit and Governance. And item 4 should read the appointment of Tees Valley Combined Authority Audit and Governance. That's the only change that was made, just to make people know that. Like I say, we'll take it as read, but if anybody's got any questions on that item. No? People have to agree the recommendations? Yes, nods. Excellent. The annual governance statement, I'll take that as read, but over to you, Emma, if there's anything you want to add to that.
Nothing to add, Chair, but I'm happy to take any questions. I have asked to this out to be tabled because, like I said, I can't hear it.
Any comments or questions on the annual governance statement? No? Okay, I'm happy to agree that. Just want to double check everybody's nodding. Yeah, sorry, I'm not I. Vigorously. Hugely supportive of the annual governance statement. Right, okay, on to item 7 then, mayoral question time, public participation, recording of meetings. Again, we'll take the items as read, but if anybody's got any questions or comments. Alec?
Sorry, did you say the mayor's question time were on there?
Yes.
Yeah. I think it's great, the question time idea. However, in Redcar and Cleveland, we record every meeting and we put it on YouTube and public questions are submitted. Now, I completely agree, if you get flooded with FOI requests and questions, it can be really burden and time-consuming exercise. However, if you limit the number of questions, I genuinely believe that somebody should be allowed to come here and submit a question and ask it verbally of us all, of the TVC, not just you, Ben. I think, for me, this sort of contradicts what we were trying to achieve with some of the Ridgewell recommendations. I just believe that if we're saying to the public they can't submit questions or ask questions whilst they're in the meeting, it does curtail that open transparency a little bit for me. The optics on I think Teesside Live were on this yesterday, and the optics aren't great, and I have to agree with some of the comments, so I can't support that. I can't support this, I'm sorry. But again, it's not against the principle of having the question time. I think that's great, and great that you're doing that, but I absolutely think the public need to be involved with these meetings.
So, two things. The recommendations in the paper are in line with pretty much all within the Mayoral Combined Authority. So, what government set out legislatively, and this government, not just the previous government, have said that this is the standard. This is what government in effect require of a combined authority that is transparent. So, if you look at what we're recommending doing, we're doing exactly, for example, what Andy Burnham does in Greater Manchester, and you'll see within the paper, most of the combined authorities have never allowed any submission of questions. Just to clarify as well, we're not talking about FOIs. FOIs is dealt with in legislation. Nobody's limiting FOIs. We wouldn't be allowed to, nor would we want to. But just to be clear, Alec, I would be surprised if your council or any of the councils around this table have ever received 120 questions for a council or cabinet meeting that you have. And we get that pretty much every meeting.
I absolutely.
And you will see from those questions that are published repeatedly online that most of those questions are completely insane. So it takes up a huge amount. Sorry, we have silence in the public gallery because people will be removed.
Well, remove us then. They're not insane questions. That's not fair.
Excuse me.
Can we just stick to the...
Can we make
Chuck
sure
us
that,
out then. Chuck us out. That's
can
not
we
fair.
make sure that the public are quiet?
They're not insane questions.
Can we make sure? Well, in my opinion, they are.
Well, chuck us out then. Seriously, if you're going to be like that, chuck us out. Chuck us out.
Can I be given come back to the?
Do we just stick to the...
I absolutely agree. 120 questions is overload, and I agree officers' time needs to be freed up. This is why I suggest an amendment to this. Why don't we limit, like Redcar and Cleveland, somebody can submit 3 questions, I think it is, to a full council meeting. But to rule them out completely. I hear what you're saying about other mayoral and combined authorities. However, they haven't gone through the journey we have in the last 2 years. And I'm not debating the reasons why we've gone through that journey, but we have been through that journey. And I just think that we need to be as transparent and open as possible. And I'm part of this cabinet, and I believe that the public, whoever it is, should be given the opportunity even to ask me as a cabinet member in these meetings what I think on these things, rather than a talking on a radio where I think that's great, by the way, and I'm not criticising that, Ben. I commend you for that. I just can't agree with this report.
Those are not just talking on the radio; they're in-person
events.
So anybody, in the same way that you're asking for, any member of the public can turn up to those meetings and ask me without having to submit in advance any question they like. So we are doing exactly that as well, as recommended by government, as has been adopted by most of the all of the combined authorities.
I hear that, but we're playing with a different hand, aren't we? A different deck compared to what other combined authorities.
But I really don't think we are. I think we're dealing with a specific set of circumstances, not necessarily because of where we are as an organisation, but because of a very small handful of individuals who choose to try and gum up the system and stop us from being able to achieve the things that we want for the region.
Okay, I'll take that on board, but I still can't support this report.
It's fair that I respond and I take on board what you say. Brenda?
Could I just, I agree with the principles that Alex outlined, and thought that his amendment might be something that we could look at. reduce the number of questions.
Can I
so
move
that
an
you
amendment?
But in terms of, sorry, how this in terms of what's proposed, if I may, the proposal is to remove questions that are submitted and responded to by officers. So at the moment what we receive is not questions to Cabinet, they're questions that are raised on papers published and they are responded to by officers. You can propose an amendment which would look at perhaps questions to Cabinet, but that we need to look at how that was dealt with. It's not as simple as we can accept 3 questions, we need to work out how they would be decided upon, how they would be chosen to make sure that it was a fair process.
Well, I don't mind in the amendment addressing that then, the fact, like 120 questions, I get that. If that's coming from the same person or 2 people, it's time consuming, but maybe the amendment could have the curtailing the amount and the volume of numbers a particular person can ask. I just don't think we in the current state of affairs, think it's the right move to remove it altogether.
But I mean, if your proposal is questions of Cabinet, that's very different to what we have at the moment, so that, you know, you can propose that amendment. It could be questions to Cabinet, to a Cabinet meeting, just like you have to your council meetings.
Can't report that.
Yeah. But we need to think through how those questions would be chosen.
Chris?
So the LGA have published I can't remember what it's called now, scrutiny protocol, which is essentially what it applies more to CAs than it does LAs. And I think actually what would be really helpful is we compared against that almost in a bit of a grid around what we are doing and what we aren't currently doing compared to the other ones. Because I think some of the things that Alex mentioned, and I think some of the things that is still not in there, is in that scrutiny protocol.
So
Is that not best practice?
Yes, the scrutiny protocol has been adopted by Ovian Scrutiny. The report has come to this Cabinet to confirm that. The only recommendation from the scrutiny protocol that wasn't accepted was the remuneration of members, from recollection. We can obviously provide Cabinet with an update on progress towards the scrutiny protocol, but it has been adopted by ONS.
So I still think there are some things that are missing. So for instance, the Cabinet report, so for example the education one today is not in Bob's name, and Bob will not be able to be asked questions on it essentially, and that is one of the things that is definitely in the scrutiny protocol. I think there's obviously different ways and mechanisms of doing the way that the questions work. In Middlesbrough, I don't think I've ever refused a member of the public asking a question verbally just out on the floor, but equally I think it's about how we present some of the reports. So, for example, I don't know how many questions I've asked this month, but probably fairly medium on the ranking. And actually the adult education, we're the only combined authority that seems to have exempted that table. And actually, is that not something that we can look at to work out where is our exemption threshold in compared to everyone else? Because is that not
That question hasn't been raised with me in advance of this meeting, but yeah, we could certainly look at it.
Yeah.
So what's the outcome? Sorry.
So at the moment we have a paper with recommendations.
And an amendment moved and seconded.
And the amendment is...
Well, what is the amendment?
The amendment.
It was some people can submit public questions.
So it's questions of Cabinet, just like you have questions to your, some of you have questions to your own meetings. Yeah.
But I also believe that they should be able to question reports, but I appreciate that when you say volume and time. I mean, even I've quoted our council, a lot of officers' time is taken up answering some of these, so to maintain them but have a limit on how many questions can be submitted from any one person on any one Cabinet cycle, would that work?
So you're proposing the introduction of questions to Cabinet and to retain public questions?
Yeah, but with the caveat that 120 is manageable, so with a how many questions a fair person could ask.
So what's the limit? Because we need that in an amendment.
3.
Three.
Yeah, per person. Would that work?
Yeah.
That's up to you.
That's an
It's
idea.
entirely up to Cabinet. You tell me what you want and I'll make it work.
20 questions, you're not telling me, does that come from 3 people, does it come from 4 people?
It comes from, my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't receive them, it comes from one email address. I don't know how many people have contributed towards the
I think, see, that would be okay, and I can see issue with it. However, I just think remove them all together at this stage, it's not the right time.
So,
It's cabinet decision.
yeah, sorry to just, I feel like I'm being picky.
I mean, I'm making it on the hoop.
No. You need to be clear on what the amendment is.
Well,
Do any? I mean, we can ask the leaders if any other leaders have any other suggestions, so we can formulate the.
So at our council we have one public question, but you can have two supplementaries, but the supplementaries have to relate to the response.
Yeah.
You know, it can't be another topic.
Right.
And how do you select that question?
So we allowed a maximum, and I can't remember the exact figure, it's 3 maximum questions at each council meeting. So it's first come, first served.
Okay.
So, just to clarify, I think, so go on, Steve.
So, at our council meeting we have the section of public questions. There's no limit as to the number of questions. I don't think any person has limited themselves to any number of questions. Each question supplied in writing, and they're allowed any supplementary questions got to follow on either from the answer or the original question. So it's fairly open. At cabinet meetings, there's a section for questions from the public. We don't usually get very many, and I don't think there's any restrictions on it at all. So that's what we do. What I also wanted to check, in paragraph 7, questions raised in accordance with the public participation protocol, what does that allow people to do? Could you remind me?
It's to raise questions on any item of the agenda in advance of the meeting, so they're received, is it 5 working days in advance? I can't remember off the top of my head. 3 working days in advance of the meeting on any item of the agenda. There are some restrictions around them not being related to the agenda, so they would be rejected, or if they don't relate to the agenda, then they're recommended to raise them as a freedom of information request.
The power is still there to ask questions.
But there's no limit on it. But if I take you back to why we brought this in, because we had no provision around it whatsoever, so I couldn't restrict them because we had no provision. So we put in a provision to try and put some vigour around it, but the number of questions that we receive is now unmanageable from an officer perspective.
So I'm possibly being a bit dim here. So what's the difference between that and what we've just been talking about in terms of the amendment?
So I think Councillor Brown's proposing a limit on, I think we're in 2 camps. We've got questions to Cabinet proposed, which is what you receive at your meeting, so public questions to Cabinet. They could be received in advance in writing, or they could be taken from the floor. Councillor Brown is also proposing that we maintain a level of public questions in advance of meetings, presumably around the papers and questions on the agenda, but that we also limit those. But I think we need to be cognizant that we need to have a method of, similar to Mayor's question time, choosing those questions. First come, first serve is one way of doing it, but then that's always the case of first off the mark, isn't it? And that doesn't always seem fair, but that's the easier way to do it. The first person to get the question in. It's a question
So Denise, how does that work at Hartlepool then? So if you have like a maximum of 3 per meeting that you might get, I don't know, let's make it up 10 requests, how do you then select?
We rarely get
Well,
one.
quite, yeah. Yeah.
But it is first come, first serve, and myself and the mayor, and if we can actually deal with it and send it to another committee, then we'll do that to make sure that we manage the time that is spent in council for the actual debate of business.
Right. Sorry, Bob, and then Chris.
Similar to Stockton, we have public question time, but it's and you ask as many questions as you want, and many people can ask, but there's a time limit of, I think, 30 minutes, I think. Public questions come after the minutes, and it's the first item on the main agenda. I think we had quite a few last time, didn't we? We had quite a few, but generally we don't get that many public questions, but obviously we have a second thing, because we have members' questions and it's to the council meeting, not the cabinet. But if anybody wants to speak at cabinet, I'll let them speak if they're speaking on one of the items that's on the agenda, whether it's a member of the public or a council member.
I think there's probably just something worth in looking at a bit around the process and around how it, because I've had a bit of a look at it, and some of the other combined authorities try and disaggregate the questions. So like on their contact us section, they have different sort of ways that you can get in contact and about different subjects, whereas what it feels like is the first option is to put the question in, and then immediately we suggest FOI, which in my head is almost sort of driving a bit of that culture, isn't it, towards the FOI if they're unsatisfied with the first question. So I think if we refine how the questions come in and try and target them a bit better, and not really sort of, I'm not saying that we don't have an FOI process, because obviously we have to, but to suggest it rather than try and reach a different compromise in a different way feels almost like we're feeding it a bit.
Yeah, and I think that is. I think that is challenging. I think the difficulty is putting a level of rigour around it and channeling questions down the appropriate route is I think has in the past been seen as trying to avoid questions. That just is not the case. If we don't channel them down the appropriate route, then we do get questions. I get questions and emails from the public directly to me. If I answered every single question from every member of the public that emails me, I wouldn't get my job done. And I think it is a case of balancing and channeling them down the right process. So we can't allow ourselves to get into a position where, and particularly we've had some issues around officers, particularly where officers are getting emails directly from members of the public asking them any question. It's just totally tenable.
And just to give you a broader idea, so we've had feedback from the ICO that we are the most FOI public body in the country outside of central government, and 68%,
Something like 68%.
all of those FOIs come from 2 people. And on top of that, you get 120 questions a meeting, which are complete nonsense, like who writes the mayor's update? The mayor. Like, you know, it's stuff. This is the thing. It's if the actual general public, the real general public, saw the stuff that was going on, they'd be horrified, because you're absolutely just wasting taxpayers' money and public time on completely farcical questions. And by the way, we still have to answer all those FOI questions because it's a whole separate legislative process, and we respond to every single one of them appropriately. That's sort of, I would push back and say it's not driving it. We got the FOIs long before, you know, a small group of, in my opinion, idiots started to trigger and think, I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to send 40 questions to the Transport Committee or 120 questions to every single Cabinet Committee. Like, it is taking up full time, a number of people who have completely separate jobs to do that are supposed to drive economic growth in this region.
So in terms of the paper you have in front of you, I think where Councillor Brown has got Cabinet to is the potential of reducing public questions to a set number per person. Is that your proposal?
Yeah, but more certainly to keep the suggested question time.
Yeah, Okay. So Councillor Brown's proposal is to accept Mayor's question time. So we're looking at a variation to the version. To approve the Mayor's question time as in the report. Yeah. And I think in that report it's also noted that it's our intention to record all of our public meetings and publish them.
Rather than going through it, Emma, let's talk specifically about the amendment.
Yeah, and then and in terms of public questions, you're proposing to reduce the number per person of public questions in advance of the meeting and have questions at Cabinet.
Well, when we say reduce, what I'm proposing is that we don't get rid of them altogether, which I think would be a mistake. So again, 120 I completely agree is unmanageable for 1 or 2 people. But what I certainly take objection to is to take that function away. So my amendment would be to agree what the agreeable number would be, whether we need to have another conversation outside of this meeting, and to also allow public questions like we do in the local authorities of Cabinet.
Chris?
Yeah. So in the approval it says paragraphs 1 to 7. 1 to 7 covers only the Mayor's question time stuff. The sentence that almost goes after is and the consequential amendment to the TVCA constitution, but that doesn't actually say what that is. But it is paragraph 12 essentially, isn't it? So is it not a case that we just don't enact paragraph 12 and seek a further consultation to ensure that?
Cabinet can choose to do that, yeah.
Because I think that's probably the cleanest way of doing it.
But I'd still like to move the amendment, Chris, where we're allowing public questions to the Cabinet, like we do in our local authorities.
Why don't we amend it a different way than Alec, and when we have mayoral question time, the Cabinet turn up and answer questions there instead? Do it with me.
Okay, I'm happy to do that.
Yeah.
So approve 1 7 and drop 12.
No, so I'm
We've got-
suggesting there is that we make an amendment to say we adopt the paper as it is, but actually what we do is we say that the whole of Cabinet, including the Mayor, will attend the mayoral question time and take public questions at mayoral question time.
But I still wouldn't want to lose the functionality of people being able to sub questions on these reports. So that's the issue I have. One of the issues I have.
So can I? We seem to be going round in circles a little bit. Could I suggest that we look at the vast majority of this report, and I think we're quite happy with most of it. In terms of the part that we're not happy with, could we discuss it further in a more productive way, really, and maybe get some ideas as to which is the better way forward?
So what you suggesting, deferring the report?
Not necessarily deferring the whole of the report.
Chris is going to give us some section 2
Some of it.
paragraph 3.
Just so that I can get home at some point, can we just kind of move an amendment that we to approve the proposal set out in paragraph 1 to 7 with the inclusion of Cabinet members being able to attend the Mayor's question time, and then drop the rest of that sentence so that we don't actually remove the public questions at that point.
But there still needs to be a limit to the public questions, so again, everybody accepts that.
I think that's
So
probably
at
for
the
the
moment that doesn't solve that, the
No,
actual
it
problem
doesn't.
that Alec originally set out,
No.
that he talked about.
But I think you probably won't be able to do that without bringing a separate decision at this point, because I think that keeps going round and round.
Don't you need to vote on the first amendment?
Probably.
Well, yeah, but we're just
Yeah,
trying
I
to
don't think we've got there
articulate
yet.
what the actual
I'm trying to
amendment
amend my
is first.
amendment there, Chris.
People are throwing
I hope
ideas.
you're not.
At the moment, there isn't a proposed amendment. I think it's more people just kind of thinking out loud as to
Oh, no,
what
no,
you're
Brenda
trying to
definitely
say.
seconded my amendment.
I did, but I mean, basically, we don't want to chuck out public questions.
Well, happy to discuss getting a balance,
To
a
get-
workable
yeah.
balance for the officers.
Right.
Wonder how you land that in an amendment.
It's challenging, isn't it? Because you have proposed, it's easy for us to propose an amendment around reducing the number of questions received in advance of meetings to a number per person.
Well, I can't accept this report while it has that line about removing the functionality.
That's what Emma's
But
just
I'm
saying.
proposing an amendment.
Oh, you're proposing an amendment?
Well, no, I'm trying to articulate your amendment, which is you want to retain it. That's fine. That's Cabinet's decision. Your proposal was, in order to retain it, was to reduce the number of questions per person. That can be proposed. You can propose that, and Cabinet, that is if you're looking for an amendment around bringing questions to Cabinet and how they're selected, I think that's a very different proposal. I think we need to look at how are they
It's a
fairly
separate-
selected.
It's a separate thing,
Because
yeah.
inviting people to come to Cabinet to raise questions, that is something I'd want to make sure was fair and open and transparent about the process for accepting those questions, make sure everybody has the fair ability to come and speak to Cabinet
And
directly.
that's not covered in this paper.
And that's not covered in this paper
It's
anyway.
separate.
So we can, so if the proposal is that the paper is accepted with an amendment that the public participation protocol remains, but that it's limited to a number of 3 questions per person. Is that what you're suggesting?
the number
I think you need to, you can't
You
just
need
say
to agree
limit,
the number,
you have
yeah.
to have an ability to have an
Yeah.
Yeah,
amendment.
I'm happy with that.
And then,
Then 3, yeah.
and for the time being, Cabinet members be invited to Mayor's question time.
You don't have to be, because I think there's.
Oh, you can't backtrack now.
Well, you can if you want to come along and answer the questions. It's fine by me. It's up to
But
you.
if cabinet members want a discussion around how we get public questions to Cabinet, I'm certainly willing to have that discussion around how we can manage that. But that is something that I can't do at this meeting
Right.
on the hoof.
So because public questions for Cabinet is a completely separate thing, just to be clear, so we can go through the process, right? So the amendment is accept the paper as it is, subject to the limitation of public questions in advance of the meeting to 3 per person that are linked to the agenda.
Yes. So the
So
criteria of the
so Ian, is that your,
I'm happy with
you're
that.
proposing that?
Yeah.
Brenda's seconding that. So hang on, that amendment has now been moved.
I'm just asking, because I'm still very unclear. So those questions that you're talking about, are you referring to the questions that are referred to in the report where numbers, there are 27 questions submitted to Transport Committee.
Yeah.
Are those the questions that you're talking about?
So it would be 3. I'm assuming it would be 3 per person per statutory meeting.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that's been proposed and seconded. So there is a vote on whether to accept that amendment.
I am torn about it because there is a real issue on both sides. I absolutely see the amount of time that's spent answering questions. But getting ourselves in a place where we're then not answering questions is also a very difficult place to be.
Those people still have the opportunity to ask questions at Mayoral Question Time, for instance. And there's also now we're talking about a separate mechanism for public questions of Cabinet, which is going to have to be dealt with separately. These are questions to officers in advance of meetings. This is the amendment we're talking about. But just to be clear, we've got to get to a point, right? So there has been a proposal, there has been a second, there is a vote. So can people vote as to whether they agree with that amendment? Agreed? Okie dokie. Moving on. Item 8. Gresham. Bit of an update. Doesn't say who's leading. Oh.
Yeah, so this is an update report following the workshop that we held for Cabinet in January. So there's a number of parallel processes in train. So the planning application is going to be considered by the Mayoral Development Corporation Board on the 10th of April. Middlesbrough Council are also in the process of taking a report through their committees around the land transfer. And depending on the outcome of those 2 pieces of work, the item is on the forward plan for June Cabinet, where it's proposed that we bring a report back to Cabinet on the proposed funding package.
Any comments or questions on that paper?
There's just a slight correction needed on the bottom of the last page.
Typo.
Yeah.
Okay. People happy to note that paper?
Yes.
Okie dokie. Moving on, Treasury Management. Over to you, Gary. On this one.
Thanks, Chair. So this is the Treasury Management Strategy for 2025-26 financial year. We have to set this each financial year. It's in line with the SIT for Code. We produce a strategy at the beginning of each year that sets out, it's based off the back of our capital plans and our budget report that members have already seen. It takes all of our capital projections, how we're going to finance them over the medium term, and ensures that we've got a strategy in place for that. We also report back as a mid-year review, midway through the financial year, performance against that strategy, and then at the end of the year we report as an outturn as well on this as well, Chair. So just happy to take any questions on it.
Any questions for Gary? People have to agree with the Treasury Management paper. Excellent. Moving on, back to you, Gary. Budget and NTFP.
Thanks, Chair. So this is the Q3 position as at the end of December 2025. We provide the update by thematic area, but we've also got within Table 2 under Paragraph 7 some of the changes that have been made, which is making sure that we've put in the full amount of UK SPF across the plan. So members might recall we had about £6 million earmarked for potential UK SPF funding source. We've added the further 15 post the government announcement that we've received £21.5 million. So there's updates for that. For now, we've put it into place, heading into the thematic area. Members will appreciate, once we approve the actual spending plans for UK SPF, we'll then update this report in terms of the split across the thematic areas that we've actually decided on. And we had to put a notional area for now within the plan of the place heading until we knew exactly what we were going to agree as the spending plans for UK SPF, but that's elsewhere on the agenda as well. And then we've got an update to the adult education budget where we received notification For our 1 year allocation, there was a reduction of £1 million from government. What we've done is, prudently, we've assumed, hopefully not, but we've assumed it's recurrent across the medium-term financial plan, so you've got a £4 million adjustment for that across the medium term within that table as well. That's pending on future spending rounds and the comprehensive spending review from government as to what that number will actually be. So we've updated for those. We updated the relevant thematic headings for that as well, Chair. But I'm happy to take questions on the paper.
Any questions from Gary? Item 10. People have to agree with the budget and the MTP. Yeah. Okay. Moving on to South East Development Corporation. Gary, sorry, he's going to pick this one up.
Yeah.
We'll take this red Gary, so we can move on.
I mean, it's just to say that we agreed post-independent review to do 2 reports for each development corporation to this cabinet. One would be on operational matters, which is this one you've got in front of you, and then the financial update, medium-term financial plans will come in the June time for June cabinet to this cabinet as well. So this is covering the first of those 2 papers for South Tees Development Corporation. Happy to take questions on the content of the paper, Chair.
No? Okay, people happy to know that paper? Yep. Moving swiftly on, item 12, transport update. Oh, there it is. I'm picking this one up. We'll take it as read out. Is there anything you want to pull out or anything you want to add to the paper?
Not particularly, Chair. I'll take any questions if there's any.
Just on the Middlesbrough train station, the undercroft, when are we expecting that to be complete?
Obviously the subway element's open now, the units, and we've got an update meeting next week with Network Rail to confirm the date for that. Obviously moving as soon as possible, but given the challenges that we've had as outlined in the report, I think that's open to it.
Okay, and is there any discussion around possibility of further expansion of Middlesbrough train station at this point?
The work package 3, which is the additional platform, is quite a detailed feasibility stage. So yeah, we'll have more news coming on that very soon.
Just on the South Bank bridge, I know the conversation around going. I'm just wondering on a deadline in terms of EMAC and the funds, which I know are there, and getting demolition and started. And
yeah, absolutely. So we will have a proposal from Network Rail in about 2 or 3 weeks. For the kind of temporary solution, so the demolition work is all quite advanced, but it's what do we put back in that kind of place. So if you go from a standing start for developing a new footbridge, it's something like 18 months. Obviously we haven't got that time, so we're really condensing those timescales. So they've been working on that for about the last 10 weeks since we knew that the bridge had to be demolished, so they just need another couple of 3 weeks to come back with that proposal costed, and then we'll be able to work the detail through from there to get it moving ASAP.
Okay, just to push it a little bit on a potential ETA on the temporary structure. I know it's in conjunction with the council.
Really challenging until I kind of see that plan from Network Rail, but it's it's weeks, weeks rather than anything beyond that. But I don't want to commit until I see their kind of delivery plan with kind of timescales. But 2-3 weeks we will know exactly that kind of delivery plan when they're proposed to go in. They will probably need to close the railway probably overnight to kind of do that work. It's all that kind of planning with the train operators to be able to do that work. So I'm more than happy to come back to you in a couple of weeks to give you an update and officers on that basis.
As soon as we do know, it'd be helpful if we can get that update.
Yeah, of course.
Brenda?
Thanks. There's so much going on, it's difficult to pinpoint. As my fellow leaders have mentioned their own patch, I will mention my own patch as well. I think that if I can just explain, I mean, Alan and I have had a recent conversation about the issues with Northern Rail, so we're kind of working on trying to improve things there. But if you look at Hartlepool and possibly Redcar at the other, Red Car. Well, I was brought up wrong, so I always said Redcar. So basically, you've got a geography that doesn't quite connect, and it's actually a lot easier to get to London from Hartlepool than it is to get to Redcar. By
Drink it where I live.
or Darlington even, yeah. There is that, I know we're going for connectivity. I don't see things in here that are actually going to do what I'm saying that should do. So I know that there are improvements in certain areas, but it's across the patch that I'm talking about, really.
Yeah, so obviously in the report we focus more on the kind of capital investment. So obviously unlocking Hartlepool Station, the capacity there was absolutely integral to the intense, the additional services that now being delivered. That steps up again in December. So there is that service, that extra service between Newcastle and Middlesbrough will go to hourly, and so that will effectively give two trains per hour on the Newcastle to Middlesbrough route, which is a significant uplift on where we were two and a half years ago. Obviously with the rail devolution and the Great British Railways, the Railways Bill, there's a lot of kind of change in the industry coming, and we're there kind of trying to influence their operations with Northern and the other train operators, as well as alongside the capital investment to make sure we've got the capacity in the infrastructure for the network to enable those kind of things. So if you recall, for example, the lack of connectivity between Darlington and Hartlepool directly is one of the key kind of challenges. We need to get the kind of Darlington project finished. We're looking at that kind of what other infrastructure upgrades do we need to do. We're talking to Northern about what's needed to introduce that service. So yeah, completely take that on board. I think the report started from kind of trying to outline the capital programme, and I'll reflect that perhaps we don't talk about some of the influencing that we're doing. We focus on the project kind of delivery. So I'll take that on board with Tom and kind of work that through for next time around.
And in effect, the outcomes that are achieved from the capital programme, like you say, everything's seen in isolation, but actually there is a plan that
you can't do one without the other, and both
maybe articulating that
in
the next report might be quite helpful for
absolutely.
Thank you.
the cabinet. Yeah, question, Tom. Yeah.
Just to say as well, Brenda, we talk about this at Transport Committee a lot, and absolutely connecting people to opportunity, whether that be employment or skills or education, is absolutely a top priority, and that's one of our core missions as a combined authority. So that's at the heart of what we're trying to do, and there's quite a lot of work we're feeding through Transport Committee about how we keep moving that forward.
Yes, thank you. I didn't mean to mention that. It is so important that people from everywhere in Tees Valley can get to their work or their education as easily as possible and as cheaply as possible.
Absolutely. Brenda?
Denise has just reminded me that the fact that our children in care are going to get that support in order to get around and get to wherever they need is really good.
Yeah. Thanks, Brenda. Very good point. Any other comments? Questions for Alan?
Just about the tardiness of the West Egg Road feasibility study, and just how far along we are along that. Someone has been caught on that pinch point many times.
Yeah, and I'm sure you'll appreciate it's not necessarily an easy solution as well. So I think that one is going to take a bit of time to enable the consultants to have a good look at all the options before they come back. I will come back directly to you with an estimated time for scale, if that's okay.
Is that the cost implication in terms of just carrying out the feasibility, the 140k?
Yeah, that's just the initial kind of feasibility work that we've got underway at the moment.
Okay, and I've just not been privy to any of these conversations yet, so I'm just wondering what sort of initial thoughts have been discussed.
Basically looking at kind of over the railway options, because you remove the interface between, as well as kind of if they're not solvable because of kind of other wider implications, then what can be done to improve the existing kind of interface between road and rail at that location as well. So it's quite a wide ranging scope.
I'm assuming the feasibility study would it encompass the local supermarket at all, Morrison's? I mean, for me, when we first built that car park, the solution should have been explored then.
I think if we're looking at under or over, there are land implications which we need to very carefully.
Possibly could we go under?
That's all what they're kind of looking at.
We need to spend 140 grand to say we can't go under, surely.
it's part of the options. They need to kind of look over is the more obvious way, but we wanted them to have a real good look, see if we can find a solution to remove basically obviously the problem is going over at the going over on the level. If we can kind of remove that interface between train and road transport.
Must be part of more.
Yeah, we have been involved in officers, but yeah, we'll make sure.
I assume as well that feasibility study is also looking at if over and under doesn't work, therefore what else do you do with the system to try and make it run more smoothly, so it's also that wider piece of work.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I know you're speaking to officers, but it'd be good to get a briefing in with Alec if you want some, so yeah.
I think we've got another couple of issues that we need to pick up on that briefing anyway, so we'll put that back in the diary.
Cool. Anything else? Okay, we'll go to the transport update. Thank you, Alan. Very much appreciated. We'll move on to the investment plan refresh, item 13. It's Gary's paper, but I think we've got to take it as read as the other papers, Gary, but have you got anything you particularly want to add?
Thanks, Chair. No, I think taking it as read, but also appreciate there's been lots of conversations on this, so it's probably worth just handing up yourself, Chair, to see what questions people have got and how you want to deal with that. Yeah.
So no, nothing to add. Okay, any comments or questions on item 13? You're looking pensive there, Chris.
Yeah, because I've only just realised something. So the public paper pack has reductions in it, in some parts of it, but there isn't exemptions. So what does that mean?
So there's an appendix 2.
Yeah.
And there is some commercially confidential information in that appendix which we've exempted from publication. So your pack has, you can see through the highlighting, so you can see what's confidential. So if you wish to discuss the elements that are confidential, we need to exclude the press and public.
Yeah.
In respect of those.
I just think there probably should have been a warning that there was a reduction put into the public pack at the same sort of time. Because I think normally there'd just be an exemption, wouldn't there?
I don't understand.
Potential of an exemption.
Usually, I suppose historically, what's been done is appendices are exempt because an appendices has been confidential.
Yes.
Well, what we've done is there's only been very specific parts of commercial information.
I mean, we could have. I don't know what you mean by one.
It would be operationally awkward to separate that out. Yeah. So that's why there was.
It's just that I'd started quoting it, not realising.
Sorry. So was it not noted in your pack?
No.
All right. So it should have been that, and that's why. I'm being told it was, but that's why what I didn't want was for you to get the blacked out version so you couldn't see what had been redacted. So the reason it's highlighted for cabinet members is so you can see what has been redacted. So the intention was to publish as much as we can, as we have committed to do so. We've only redacted what is commercially sensitive.
Okay.
So just on that note, just that members and the public are clear, cabinet members have received exactly what has been published on the website, save for cabinet members' copies have been highlighted rather than redacted in black like they've been published on the website. That's to enable cabinet members to understand the commercially confidential information, so that if they wish to discuss it, we'll have to move to exempt the public and the press from the meeting.
Okay. Second point I'd like to raise is the approval covers loads of different things, and in my head it should be individual approvals. So, for instance, a cabinet member might agree with, for instance, the Trailblaze programme, but not the Intercity Transport Fund. But because it's one exception for all of them, that feels not great, if I'm honest. I think the other thing that I'd raise, and I don't know if Gary has a response to it, but I had raised around the fact that, I don't know if that's confidential or not, but that there was potentially some... No, I don't think it's in there. So potentially there was a letter of intent. Are we allowed to reference that, which was referenced at previous meetings?
From the airport?
Yes.
Yeah, so there are letters of intent from tenants wanting to come to the airport.
Yes. So one of the suggestions that I made to Gary was, what is the viability of being able to secure partial rental income from that as a repayment on some of the capital outlay?
This is the point to TVCA rather than...
After TVCA.
So, let me pick up the second point. On the first point, around the single approval is because, while each individual thing is costed, you'll see that many of the things overlap with each other. So, you know, you're talking about £50 million worth of business support, but that comes in SPF, it comes in IZ, it also comes separately in £2.7 million of skills funding that would get devolved, I think, to Hartlepool Council to operate on behalf of the other councils for skills and education support. And the capital funding is in a similar way that some of the capital projects overlap. So the way that we've done this previously as well, the way that the investment plan works is it is an integrated financial settlement, because if you start to pick certain items out and approve some and then not approve others, then that has a wider implication on borrowing of the organisation, and then ultimately you'd have to come up with, I suppose in theory, like 20, 30 different financial mechanisms for, well, if you chose to approve this set and not this set, or this one and not that one, the matrix would be unworkable. So the idea is that this is the proposal that's been worked through now for the last couple of months. Therefore, you're accepting the adoption into the investment plan that has a huge impact on budget, MTFP, financial projections going forward. So it allows the paper to demonstrate what happens if there is an acceptance of the paper and the impact it has on the finances of the organisation as a whole. On the second point, do you want that?
Thanks, Chair. So on the second point, there's two elements really to it. One is what Councillor's referring to is letters of intent, which are, as we know, are contractual obligations. They are letters of intent, so they are not firmed up. In terms of the possibility of, if they were to be firmed up, the benefits of that, going back to the combined authority, yeah, that's something that we could do commercially in terms of the relationship with the grant that is given to the airport. So this is asking for a grant to the airport. What you're referring to there is if something that isn't in the plans at the moment comes to fruition, could there be some conditionality in terms of that coming back to combined authority? The second point relates that even if we were to do that, I wouldn't allow for that based on a letter of intent as income within the investment plan, because obviously it's not an obligation at the moment. So from a prudence perspective, I wouldn't bank on that, for want of a better word, in the investment plan, unless that had changed in terms of status, if that makes sense as well. So the first point, yes, potentially, in terms of the arrangements with the an element of grant repayment, yeah, for that. The second point about when I could actually account for that or deal with that would depend on how firm that became as a proposition. Does that answer the question?
Yes, that answers the question. Essentially, I'm more comfortable with that as a position, because I don't think we would bank on it either. I think, but to try and formalise that as an agreement feels like a logical way forward to try and secure a stream of revenue coming back. Because if I'm honest, I'm not quite comfortable with how the process has been handled thus far. In the December paper, it was quite clear that there was a line around local leaders' involvement, and I don't feel like that's happened. I think there's been conversations with what's referred to as the Tees Valley Management Group, chief execs, but actual involvement of the leaders, I don't think has happened to the degree that I would have liked it to. I think there are proposals out there, and I wouldn't expect the chief execs to be cited on every single proposal, every single conversation that gets had. But I think there needs to be an improvement about how we do that interaction, because this doesn't feel like it's landed in the right way. The first time that the leaders were really properly cited on paperwork was when we actually saw it with the airport already in, whereas I would have liked an earlier conversation, if I'm honest, as soon as that was available.
Yeah, so, and I think we've talked about this informally, haven't we, Chris, that going forward we're trying to propose that, you know, for example, around next year's UK SPF, subject to whatever happens in the spending review, starting next week or the week after with everybody and kind of saying, here, where are your pipeline of projects, what's going to happen in the what could be a spend in the ground in the next 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, right? And then all of a sudden you can then objectively assess those against the Treasury Green Book. We do that all the time, because ultimately whatever we allocate, we're still reporting back up to central government to make sure it's value for money. And then we can say, right, there's an objective list of projects across all 5 local authority areas. They've been assessed against the Green Book on value for money and BCRs, so, you know, how much private sector money does it leverage for every pound of public sector money that goes in. And then part of that role of this group is also to sense check some of the subjectivity in that. So something might score slightly lower than another project, but contextually, across the region, we might decide that that goes slightly higher up the list. But it's always been that short-term capital calls always suspect a runaround where everybody says, what projects have you got on the shelf? And in reality, I mean, to be fair, governments of both colours tend not to recognise this. They say, right, here's some money that has to be spent, and they don't necessarily allow for the amount of work, as you guys all know, with all of your capital projects, that has to go in to be able to build that. So I absolutely accept that, and if we can start that from next month, and we can build that for the next kind of few months to make sure we have an objective pipeline, until we stop this kind of projects coming out of left field, or we weren't aware of that, there should be a list of projects that we're all just basically fighting to get funding for, either locally or from central government, and it just continues to filter down with obviously the more strategic, higher value for money BCR projects at the top that ultimately get agreed by us as a group, and then it just continues to work down. So I accept that point.
So I think if that could be referenced in some sort of way, I don't know if we need to, I'm almost begrudged to do an amendment at this point, but I think that needs to be formally sort of agreed that we need to do almost like a refresh of that process and how we do acquire those. And then the second point, how we work that in around what Gary said, but for me that's crucial. Best value for money in my head means that any time that we can secure a revenue stream against something, we absolutely should be.
So on the first point, I don't think it needs an amendment, Chris, but I think we should absolutely be in an agreement between all of us that, and it's already been offered informally, we've had this conversation about this, that in the coming weeks, certainly in April, we need the first meeting in to talk about you guys starting to bring your pipelines together, starting to build those short, medium, long-term projects together, that the team can start to get sight of them and work on them with you. So again, it's also not just about you providing us a list of projects and saying this is what we're doing. It's kind of like, we've got some ideas, we've got some longer-term ideas, so we can actually help build those projects with you and secure revenue streams. So we should absolutely just say that's what we're going to do, and we'll work towards, in effect, the next investment plan refresh, which would be budget at the end of the year, really, budget and investment plan refresh. We should absolutely mean it that we will do that. I think, sorry Alec, just on the other point, I just want to be clear, so with the hangars that would be built, the hangars will be leased to tenants, of which tenants, you know, literally want to start these things tomorrow if they can, depending on how today goes. Obviously the revenue stream is, the rent will go to the airport, but then it's a bit like TSAM, the business rates will go to the council. So there are separate revenue streams, and in the same way that we did it for TSAM, it's set up in pretty much the same way, which seemed to work very well, I thought, which is why we followed a similar model for this project.
We did also secure the rents as well with TSAM. So we not only received business rates, but we received rents as part of that agreement.
So,
I think all of that comes back to us though.
No, not all of it,
Yeah.
but I think
Yeah.
the way
you
that
repay to
we
the
work-
through the rates.
yeah, we worked out a percentage of it.
no, that's the point. So from a TVCA point of view, there's an outlay there where we're not receiving back everything. That's the point. So it goes to the council, and some of that is repaid through the rates, and the council keep the income. So it's the same. So, you know, in effect, actually the TVCA are the one that lose out, because in effect the rent goes to the airport and the business rates go to the council, which is fine, because ultimately it's all reinvestment back into the region, right? But you're still capturing those revenue streams in the same way that we do it at TSAM. They're just different recipients. Brenda?
Thanks. So I would echo Chris's concerns, and just to get to the nitty-gritty really, I feel rather concerned about the fact that the capital spend from the UKSB is on I think as well, to compound that, it's unfortunate that it's going to a place where already a lot of money has been put in, and the perception of people throughout the area, I think, is that it keeps getting money, and how long is it going to be before that sort of need for putting money in will stop. Now I know there's a 10-year plan, and I know we're over halfway. So there's two things that I want to ask. First of all, I think it's possibly time, and I'm sorry if you've already done this and I haven't been party to it because of time, and coming into this later, but it would be good, I think, to have a workshop about the airport, and just to get exactly where we're at with it, and what exactly is going on. I know there's a big report here, but it's not quite the same as having that workshop and that sort of deeper view of what's going on. And secondly, is there any wiggle room at all for that money to be shared a little bit more at this stage?
In what way?
So, the Shared Prosperity Fund, the capital spend that's going into the airport, is it possible for less to go into the airport and more to go to local authorities to fund some of their projects?
Okay. I'll try and take all of these, if you don't mind, and if I get anything wrong, I'm sure just jump in. So just one, I suppose, Brenda, it is a hefty pack, but the business plan is one of the redacted items in the paper, so it gives you an idea of the profitability of the airport with and without the capital investment. And again, I know we've all talked about this informally outside of this meeting, but I do get the feeling that if this same proposition had come and it hadn't been on the airport but had been in Thornaby Industrial Estate or in Oaksway, we wouldn't be thinking twice about this, because the investment is in the businesses that want to create 250 jobs that they can't create if this capital investment doesn't come. And if somebody wanted to create that level of jobs and with that type of investment, we have done before and we would do that irrespective of where it is. So I think that's an important point to make, because this isn't revenue going to the airport. This is a capital project for two businesses that want to build hangars and use them to be able to create jobs, of which, you know, the likes of Airborne Colours and Willis have already created jobs in a similar fashion already. I mean, I think Willis employ.
So it is 250 jobs?
Yeah, it is. From the money that, if this gets signed off, will create. You'll remember from the informal briefing that was given, the 250 jobs that we have said that will be created is in the definite phase, as in there are draft leases that will probably be signed this afternoon if this goes through. But there are other hangers, which are the letters of intent that Chris talks about, that go beyond that take you to kind of 300-400 jobs with other hangers coming, that because we've put the infrastructure in, we don't have to pay for, because other private investors will pay for those hangers once the infrastructure is in. I also think it's worth saying on the redirect, the short answer is, well, no, because the proposal is what it is in the short term. I would also say, though, Brenda, that, and I get why when people asking the question, and Chris makes the right point about process, and things can always be improved, right? We've got a record going forward. If we can bring everybody inside the tent, we should get that pipeline. But I also think that you need to, if you look at the investment plan refresh, you need to take a step back, because the whole of the UKSPF programme is like 21.5 million quid. 6 million quid of it is capital. But the investment plan refresh is like a 100 million plan, and there's a huge amount of capital, you know, 15 odd million quid for the film studios and 30 million quid here, but basically across the two development corporations in Hartlepool, I think the capital spend on infrastructure is about 42 million. So I would say, yes, everybody's keen to attract funding, and they always look at specific, I'm not referring to you, Brenda, but in general, we all look at specific costs and think, well, where's our share of that? But if you take a step back and look at the overall £100 odd million that's being approved, you find that, like you say, it's 6% or less than 6% of the overall allocation, with tens of millions of pounds going elsewhere as well. So I appreciate the point specifically on UKSPF, but we've tried to, which again is another reason we've wrapped it together as a full thing, because it's about capital spend across the patch. It's a much bigger thing, and then actually in the overall scheme of things, it's a relatively small amount.
I will say that some of the projects within this investment plan are really good, particularly things like the Youth Trailblazer.
Yeah.
So I'm very supportive of that.
And I think on the workshop, it's a good idea as well. But I also think there's been some confusion, I think, on how this has come about as well. But it needs to be clear that around the airport request, that was a request of the Teesside Airport Board, and the board obviously is appointed by each of you as local authorities as shareholder to represent your interests as shareholder. And so the request was unanimously approved by the airport board to, in effect, come to TVCA and make this request of us. So just to let you know as well that it has also been seen by your directors that you appoint through your kind of council processes as well. So it does take time, and I also appreciate that you guys are also busy, so you're kind of leaving different leads to be able to concentrate on things, because you can't be across everything. But a workshop with leaders, given that you also wear two hats, you've got your own interest as your shareholding as a local council, but as TVCA as well, you sit on both sides of the fence, because in effect you have a hat on as, 89% shareholder as well through TVCA. So, I mean, I don't think the airport, it'd be the airport that would do it, but we can get the airport to put a workshop on, take you through it, either individually or collectively. Pretty relaxed, to be honest. Sorry, Stephen. Sorry, Mr.
I did have my hand up about 3
Oh,
quarters.
did you?
You said I got
Do you
it,
mind,
Alec.
do you mind, Alec?
Sorry.
No, go on, Alec. No. I don't do you a disservice.
No, sorry, you're in mid-floor. That's okay.
Very
I
kind.
think, first of all, I think it's a little bit unfair to say because it's the airport of Brenda Harrison question.
No, I'm not saying it's wrong.
I think it was a little bit unfair, especially when we look at the amount of public money that's gone into the airport. I mean, I don't think there's a leader around this table who doesn't want the airport to succeed, but I think we're at the stage of 150 million plus now over the 5 years, which, if it works, great, we all want it to succeed. But I think it's a bit unfair when, okay, it is a relatively small amount of money in the grand scheme of the whole report, but it's still 6.5 million quid.
To create 250 jobs.
Yeah, I know, I appreciate
Yeah.
that. Well, it's not just that, is it? It's the other 150 million that have brought us to this point where that will make that difference, isn't it? So it's not just this 6.5 million. My question is parochial, sorry Brenda, it's around when am I going to get the 1.8 million in the account? When's it going to clear on our, but the 6.5 million, and just about the workshop things and touching on that, and again about transparency, how was it decided that 6.5 million would be allocated from this fund? Who were the decision makers? Was it you, Ben, or was it the officers, or was it a collective? Again, I'm not pushing the point.
No,
I'm not saying you shouldn't go to the airport.
No, absolutely.
But of course, as a local leader, being parochial, my own needs. I mean, East Cleveland, I can't get a bus, so if 1 point whatever a fifth of that is would help, people get buses, then of course I'd want to be privy to that conversation as well. So I'm just wondering around some of the decision making on that 6.5.
Yeah, unfortunately, I wish we could use it on buses, but it's not revenue. And that's
Yeah,
I know, it's a whole separate conversation. But so the process has been established and been agreed by Cabinet. So with UK SPF, we went through a process where the UK SPF board was established, which is kind of chaired by one of the local authorities. It has local authority representation on it. That's the starting point of the process. They tend to handle the day-to-day of the UK SPF programme. And as that then goes through, it then recommendations are made, or projects are received that then feed into that system. That then goes into our cabinet process. And our cabinet process is kind of 8 weeks long, where draft papers are then coming through those different parts. So it'll come through the UK SPF. This is simplification, right? But it comes through the UK SPF board. It'll then go into an early draft paper, the cabinet reports, like 8 weeks before a cabinet. That then goes into management group, which is kind of your mid-level, I think, regen directors at each council. They then check all the papers. They then give us feedback. Once it kind of clears that hurdle, it goes up to the financial directors of the councils. They then check all the cabinet papers, including the UK SPF stuff. Then it goes up to, I think, Chief Executive get a briefing on it separately as well. And then the idea is, which to be fair, we've only just introduced, again, after many, many years, is the idea of an informal cabinet where, outside of the formal meeting, we try and bring leaders into the tent, because you're also running your own local authorities as well, to try and, even though it's gone into your system, the idea is, let's bring those back in formal cabinet, so outside of this forum, we can get into it before you're sat here having to make a decision, because cabinet papers haven't been published. They can still be changed, because then you've got 7 days you've got to publish them for before you can make a decision. So it is a pretty comprehensive process. As Chris has pointed out, nothing's perfect, right? And I don't think anybody would suggest that we're perfect. And if there are improvements that we can make, and we recognise that we've minuted that we need to take forward that we can do, then absolutely we can do that.
Yeah, okay. So on the 1.8 million, again, just a little bit of feedback.
So what's the 1.8 million, Alec, just for my mind?
1.6, sorry. Am I giving us an extra 200 grand? Just on the capital...
you mean if it was split 5 ways, you mean?
No, I'm talking, if you go on the papers,
which,
the one bid from us. That
right, okay.
Within the report.
Yeah.
I mean, the feedback, again, just on Chris's point about the process, was it did feel a bit, and you've acknowledged it, and I thank you, Mayor, for doing that, this whole process about how bids are submitted. I'm just wondering to know, I'm not going to touch on what you and Chris have already discussed, but when do we get that money?
We got notification of the allocation on the 13th of December, I think it was.
Shall we share
UK SPF.
Are you? I think there's a couple of points, Ali. The East Cleveland bus is being extended through other money, so that's being extended through the bus service improvement plan money, so that's got another year, hasn't it, Alan?
Yeah.
Extension.
Yeah, yeah, I know that.
Are you referring to?
The 1.6 million for the market space and the... On page 15. It's the 106.5 million.
So the recommendation in the report is that all of the UKSPF capital goes to the investment opportunity at the airport.
So we don't get it?
No.
So why is it in the report that you estimate to accept?
It's in the report to say that it's been assessed against other projects and hasn't qualified. Because we said at the beginning...
When was it decided that we weren't getting it?
When it was assessed against the criteria that showed it wasn't value for money.
When was that decision made?
Well, it's not.
I haven't been made aware of
No,
that.
the decision's not made.
We've been made aware of that, John?
The decision hasn't been made.
Hang on a minute.
No, we haven't.
Well,
it's
hang on,
in the
yeah.
report.
No, but it is in the report.
Yeah, please.
No, hang on. I just need to be clear. You have been made aware because it's in the papers, and the papers basically assess the viability of the project. So 8 weeks ago, when these papers were first drafted, it was in these papers that this wouldn't go forward because we've assessed it and it doesn't qualify.
It's saying it doesn't qualify in terms of some kind of...
The decision hasn't been made. We're saying in the report for information.
And when did I get this paper with the retraction in?
You got all those papers 8 weeks ago.
Well, this one to say that it wasn't going ahead.
No, it's in there to show you that it doesn't qualify, and those are the reasons. Because we said at the beginning of the process, any project that is submitted will be assessed and shared with Cabinet on the assessment criteria.
That's not my understanding there.
So
My understanding at all.
the partnership group, I chaired the meeting and I said any proposals that came forward for the capital spend will be presented in the cabinet report.
What was that meeting, sorry?
20th of December?
I think the meeting, well, the first time we had a cabinet discussion was the 20th of December. We had the
The
partnership.
meeting you've just alluded to, sorry.
The partnership group was in 11th of February. And your office has submitted those proposals and they're presented in the report, but we've assessed them and we believe the recommendation to support the airport is because that has a stronger strategic fit and has a better value for money assessment.
Right, okay, so again, that contradicts what Ben's just said. So on the 11th of February, you presented these reports. Then since then, you've assessed it and it wasn't valuable, the money should go to the airport. That completely contradicts what Ben's just said.
It doesn't.
It does to me.
So, I think this reflects what Chris was saying earlier about the process of this and how the process needs to be more robust in the future. But I have to say, Alec, that my understanding was that it was a bid put forward and was unsuccessful.
No. Okay.
And to be fair, that may be confusion in the way that the report's been drafted. But
So is it 8.1 million then that's going to the assessment?
6.5. 6.5.
So what's happened to that 1.6 then? Is it just...
There isn't a 1.6.
It never existed.
Yeah, it never existed, yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, no, give me a rub it now. Okay.
I see what you've done in the table, so I appreciate it. Yeah, when you read it, you might interpret it as, oh, hang on. It's both of those things rather than one or the other. So
there's no successful bids from any of the 5 authorities?
The other authorities didn't submit any.
We did, but we didn't have enough time to build the business cases. I think, and
Yeah.
if you look at the timeline, I think when we were notified in December, I think there are improvements we can make in the process.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think the challenge is obviously we only got any confirmation at a high level that we get UKSPF for 25, 26 in the spending review. Then we got our allocation in December, and that was presented to Cabinet, so Cabinet knew what the allocation was. And
See, I've been completely briefed differently from my officers, so there has been something lost in translation here.
yeah, so as soon as we knew what our specific allocation was on the 13th of December, Cabinet met the week after, and we had a discussion around what the allocation was, and we all recognised that it's a very tight turnaround turn. So we went away and we worked through the officer groups to say, look, we need to look at our pipeline, you need to look at yours. You were given the opportunity to feed in proposals, but admittedly it was a short turnaround time because we were under pressure. We then said at the meeting, any proposals that came forward would be presented to Cabinet. Your officers submitted proposals, which are why they're in the report, Alec.
Sorry, Chris and
I keep forgetting the alliteration of the group, the T-Valley Management Group. is it possible to sort of have their minutes circulated just so we clearly understand what that process was? Because I think clearly there's a bit of a difference in understanding between everyone. I think I'm also, if I'm honest, I'm a bit concerned that the airport was able to put in a successful bid, but the authorities weren't. So how did, essentially, because we treat it as an outside body at this point, don't we? How were they able to navigate that process more effectively than everyone else? So I think those minutes will be very useful.
Absolutely. When it comes down to kind of oven-ready projects with business cases, as has been alluded to, and the timescales meant that it was difficult to have business cases put in place that could then be validly assessed. And it goes back to this short timescale, which again goes back to the wider conversation we had before, which is if we can start this proper pipeline from kind of next week or the week after, by the time you get to February, March next year, January, February next year when we're approving the budget, then all of a sudden everybody's had months and months to be able to build business cases. And it may be the case if we can have a pipeline where you've got business case ready investment, i.e. projects off the shelf that just need funding. You might have some that need some work, feasibility, etc., that requires some money to be injected to get them to business case. And there'll be a long list of kind of, big ideas, strategic projects that are a long way away that don't have a business case that obviously you wouldn't take off the shelf if there was a pot of money tomorrow, which is why you've got to have that full blend of projects. So when you come along with things like UKSPF and say, right, we've got the allocation, we know what the allocation was on, like the 13th of December, I think it was, and we need it approved in March so we can get spades in the ground and make sure we don't have to give it back because it all has to be delivered within one fiscal year. That massively limits the ability of local authorities to do that. That's not a fault of the local authorities, it's just the nature of the short-termism on that one-year cycle. And again, at a separate informal meeting we talked about this. The big thing that will help us is the spending review, because we haven't had a proper spending review for years. So hopefully in the spending review and then in the autumn statement, we'll get a 3-4 year settlement of UKSPF. So rather than running around year to year saying, oh, this is our allocation, we'll have a much larger pot over a 4-year period, which then allows us to plan in those projects and give the local authorities time to go through the planning, go through the pipeline, get those business cases ready and make sure they're deliverable, so at the end of that whole process, we're not handing money back to the government at the end of the programme because we haven't spent it in time. So lots of things and factors have come together just to make it difficult for the local authorities to be able to have done that. And with the greatest respect, like Renko was the only one that managed to put something in, and I'm sure it would have put more stuff in if it had had more time and the ability to go through this process had we known sooner where the money was coming from. But again, that's as we keep saying.
How can the airport have plenty of time to get the bid in and not the local authorities? Is that
it's not.
I'm struggling with.
So it's just that they had hangars and everything ready to go. So the business case, the value for money, the cost of the hangars, we've known as part of the airport business plan, it's always about building hangars. The airport doesn't have any capital to build hangars. So that when airport money came along that was available, there was a project ready-made off the shelf that didn't need to be done, it could just go straight in and be ready. Now again, to be clear, this time next year, if there's 30, 40, 50 projects, and let's say all of them have a big business case against them, so they're all ready in the same way that the airport ones are ready, the airport will be assessed in the same way as every other project. And if it doesn't strategically score as highly as other projects, which by the way is objective, it's against the Treasury Green Book, then it might not get funded. And that's the process that we've been going through. It's just that, it's been unhelpful because of the short-term nature of when we got the funding as to when it needs to be out the door and this kind of lack of spending review and all this other stuff that comes up.
Okay, I think so. The implications of this not going through, would the airport then be unsustainable? Is that what we're saying?
No. The airport has council been signed off and is completely viable.
Okay.
So if this doesn't go through, the airport will still be operating, despite what's been reported. It'll still be operating in May, June, July, and next year as well. It's absolutely fine.
Okay, so what's the implications of not agreeing the full amount then?
The loss of 250 jobs in investment on the airport.
Okay. So have they tried to raise this money elsewhere from the private sector?
Yes, they have. Yeah, absolutely. And again, part of this, we talked about this, and I appreciate other things going on, and you weren't able to be there. About half of this is also for infrastructure. So it's the idea that you've got to build the aprons and the taxiways. You don't build them, and then all of us, which is why, just to be clear though, when you put those in, okay, a hangar's being built, but when you put the taxiway and aprons in, we're talking about 250 jobs, but we also touched upon potentially another 150, 200 jobs, because what we're being told by these investors is once this hangar's built, they're going to be able to build hangars separately because the infrastructure exists, and one of the things that makes it viable for them to do it at the minute is they won't get the money and affordability to build the hangar and put the actual infrastructure in. It's a bit like building a warehouse on a business park and it doesn't have a roundabout road to the warehouse.
So some of this money touches on the connectivity for the airport then?
Yeah.
For a red car, it's pretty much impossible to get here on public transport.
Connectivity as in, you know, you come off the runway and you need the aprons for the planes to get to the hangars, not necessarily.
I'm talking about the 250 jobs that people get here, so it's literally all being spent on the logistics around the hangar.
Yeah.
I think Mike and Bob had their hands up a while ago, didn't they?
So, Bob, did you have your hand up?
Just to say that we did try to get something ready, but I think it was the time frame that the money had to be spent that we weren't really ready to get it that quickly.
That's true, Bob, and I also think...
Then we only set a quarter on the in stocking for housing.
And I know as well that what we've talked about is that, it's the whole conversation we're trying to have is it's not just about UK SPF, and there are other pots of money that are available that we're pretty confident we'll be able to fund that takes away some of the time pressure to allow you to build that project and get it delivered. So I'm just going to come to Brenda if you don't mind.
Steve's had his hand
Oh, sorry,
up,
Steve. Come and keep you.
It's very polite.
I'll put your hand up like right up.
Just, Chris touched on this, and I'm not quite sure it's a certain question as I'm asking. In terms of the grant that's in paragraph 87, I presume because it refers to borrowings, financing costs associated with that. It's not detailed, but it's borrowing, so that there must be. I think it's important that given that is the case, that those costs sit with the airport rather than TVCA. And my rationale is that it's going through a 10-year business plan. We don't really know where it'll be at the end of it. In the 10 years, we'll have a big decision to make about what we do about the airports. And in making that decision, we will need to understand what the costs are, and whether it's making profit, whether it's making a loss. We'll need to make a decision about going forward what the undertaking is. And I think it's therefore important that if we are, as is here, there's a loan being taken out to support this infrastructure work. Those costs do need to sit with the airports, so we have a clear picture about what the day-to-day running costs are on the airport, including investment. The SPF funding is slightly different because it's a grant from government, but the part of it that is the grant through that loan, there are financing costs coming through with it, and I think those costs could sit on TVCA's books, but I think that's less transparent about us as a board understanding what the running costs of the airport are. Hopefully we'll get it in a position where it's self-financing, but if it isn't, we do need to understand what some of those costs are, and therefore part of those costs, and argue, sit with this borrowing. I wasn't sure whether what Chris was asking in terms of some of the revenue coming back from the which is on the sheds.
So I think Chris's point was subtly different, but I think that in terms of that point, sorry, Councillor can speak for himself, but in terms of these, in terms of the point you've mentioned there, Councillor Harker, the paper itself's got the risk element in around, the financing, and as you rightly say, TVCA is element of this is UK SPF funding, element in terms of how the grant is funded, that's going to the airport of the 12.5 million, 6.5 million is UK SPF, the other 6 million is TVCA's borrowing to provide that grant. It's a grant to the airport from the airport perspective. And we've covered within the paragraphs around paragraph 128 for information, but in terms of how we're financing that and how we're dealing with that financing cost. I think the other related point you're making is around, is that the true cost around to the airport in terms of things, in terms of the interest cost? Well, the decision here, like with any other business, if we're looking at how we source the funding to pay for that grant is a matter for TVCA, but in terms of it's a grant to the airport that's been the decision that's in front of members today and that's been made. So in that sense, if we're approving it as that, as such, there isn't a financing cost to the airport. They're getting a grant for this particular proposal.
And that's what that's my understanding of it.
Just playing it back, that's all.
The point I'm making is that financing cost should sit with the airport. They've understood correctly the reason the grant has been made is that they're unable to secure the loan themselves through commercially, and therefore we're helping. And I don't have a problem with us helping. The issue is that there is still a financing cost that TVCA are picking up rather than the airport. Because if I look, sorry,
what I was trying to say is that on a lot of grant projects we do this in the same way. And so if we're objective about it, dealing with it as a third party, we've given grants to people TVCA borrows, we don't then load those interest costs onto the grantee that's building a factory or a warehouse somewhere.
But if I've
It's the internal cost of
yeah,
finance.
But if I understood from the briefings we've had today, one of the questions that was being asked was why doesn't the airport secure the loan themselves? And the answer was, in the current circumstances they can't. And I won't go into the details, but I know you've explained what those reasons were. And that therefore TVCA said, well, okay, the TVCA thinks we need to support the project, which is fine. And to enable them to do that, we can offer a loan because they can't get it commercially. But presumably, had they been able to raise the loan commercially, that's what they would have done, and they would then had to find.
I think you're back to the Councillor, you're back to the underlying is it a viability point in terms of, so the reason the grant's going in is for economic growth reasons in terms of those points, rather than there's a commercial case that's being put forward for that particular recipient in terms of that. Like if there was a business coming to us asking for a grant for viability reasons, we'd assess it with the business case in terms of that and whether we're going to give them that grant, if I've understood the question correctly.
Yeah, I just come back, I think it's the point, I think in this instance the cost of that loan should sit on their books because it's then better understood what the airport's done in terms of the money it's had to invest into itself. Because at the end of the 10 years we need to understand where they are in terms of whatever the revenue streams are coming in and what it costs them to get there, and if it's still such that they're having to invest at a loss, and that loss has to be supported somewhere, we need to understand what that is at the point we make a decision about what we do in the longer term about the airport. Because at the beginning of the 10 years we said that this is what we're going to do. We don't know at the end of the 10 years where it will be in terms of whether it will require an ongoing level of subsidy or not, and that a lot of that's going to depend on how successful it is, probably more to do with the commercial side than the passenger side. At the end of 10 years, hopefully there'll be a sufficient on the commercial side that will then support the passenger side to make the airport self-sustaining. And if part of that involves investment on the airport, we need to be fully clear about what investment's gone into it and what costs are associated with that. Because if that financial support needs to continue in the future, unless we make it clear as we go through that 10-year process what money's being put in and what the cost of that, in this instance borrowing, we will never have a clear picture of the finances of the airport in the round. And I take your point that it's a grant like we do other things, but I think there is a difference between the SPF money, which in a sense is free money because it's coming from government from another source, and that's not quite the same as TVCA saying we will give them a grant, because then we're using our money to support a project, and my concern is that's then lost in the bigger picture of what the airport costs and whether it's self-financing basically.
Yeah, I guess the observation I was clunkily trying to make is that from the airport perspective and the investment, like I'm trying to treat them like post the independent review. This was some of the feedback. These are separate entities, separate businesses. So the separate business coming to us asking for a grant, not asking for a loan, not asking for a grant for that. So we're treating it as that. If regards to how we're sourcing the finance to pay for that, and that could be airport, it could be business B, business C, business D, as the Mayor said, that comes along later down the track, could be our development corporations that have had grant money in from the investment plan that isn't all sourced from grant, it's sourced from maybe had all the funding sources. Yeah. So I'm trying to be consistent with the approach we're taking, irrespective of whether it's the airport, development corporation, or anything else. We treat it as the transaction. The transaction is a grant to the airport, so we're trying to be transparent with that point in terms of how that funding is being provided within the papers here, but we're also being transparent with the fact that where we are funding it from a TVCA hat-on perspective in this instance is an element of borrowings going in towards that, and there's a cost of that to TVCA. That isn't a cost to the airport, it's a cost to TVCA, as per the report's written. So I'm just trying to keep the entities, like I would with a business, separate in terms of what it means for them. But the fundamental point you're trying to make around keeping on track of the overall money that's gone into the airport, totally agree with that in terms of the business plan, the grants, whether it's specific to this initiative or whether it's what went in the first place. I think Councillor Brown mentioned about how much is, cumulatively how much is going in. All of those points absolutely agree with. any decisions we're making, we're saying that entity is getting this money and it's had this from TVCA, absolutely, we track all of that. And what value for money are we getting from the back of that in terms of the investment we send in the business plan? So I'm totally in agreement with that point. I don't want to muddy the waters with that. So totally in agreement with that.
Can I just ask Gary, is it possible if cabinet members wish to know in the future, and this might come up to Pat's point, what cost to TVCA is of that borrowing at any point in the future?
Yeah, we
Is that something
yeah, absolutely.
you provide
Yeah,
to
yeah.
cabinet members
Yeah, that's
so
not a
they can
problem.
Use that information.
It's not a problem.
Whichever way they wish
Yeah.
going forward. Is that way you?
That could be
I mean, that would help. I suppose to lay the point in this particular instance, my understanding is that the reason they've come to us for the money is not because they couldn't afford to finance it themselves, but that in the circumstances, as I understand it, they wouldn't have been able to get a commercial loan for the purpose of for this purpose, and they've had to come to us because of that. So it's not that they say we can't afford to finance this grant, it's that we can't get the grant, and therefore can TVCA help out? And we've said yes.
There's a fundamental point. We've talked about there's a viability gap on these type of projects. That's the issue for the grant intervention that we've got, and it's the same for any other grant interventions we do. We look at things like, is it for economic growth, is it viability gap, any myriad of those sorts of things that we've had projects on. For this one, there's a viability gap on that project that needs to be dealt with, and that's why
In
the
addition
question
to what you said, there is one of the reasons that hangers don't get built very often in the country is there's also a fundamental kind of market failure viability gap issue that this is also bridging. So one of the reasons you can't get a commercial loan is because of that viability gap. Not just about the airport project, can or can't.
Yeah, and I do understand that, and that's my problem. They come to us because they can't get the money from elsewhere. They're not saying we can't afford to get the money. They said that we were unable to get that £6 million from anywhere else. They can't get a commercial loan, and that's how it is.
There's
2 points. Not only can you not get a commercial loan, but there's also a viability gap in the project, which even if you could get a commercial loan, you wouldn't get one because there's a viability gap in the project. There's two parts to it.
The point I'm making is they haven't come to us because they said we can't afford to finance sourcing that money. It's about that they're unable to get that £6 million that we're giving, that we're then giving.
On property transactions, viability gaps cover several points, some of which you're talking about, but others are around the fact that even if you could secure a level of rental on that, it won't be enough to repay debt on a project like that, of the debt that's required to build the thing in the first place. That's a viability gap. So even if you get hold of money, it's not, and you could persuade a lender to give you that money, which you wouldn't, by the way, for the reasons we just said, but even if you could, you wouldn't be able to repay that back because you wouldn't have sufficient returns to repay back the cost of that debt based on the market rental values and the rental values you can achieve in the marketplace. That's a viability gap in itself as well. Does that make sense? So that's not just about getting the money, that's about the fundamental overall project viability point.
How much is that kind of concern then ongoing in future years?
Well, as we say, because it also takes into the fact that you have to put the infrastructure in as well, that increases the viability gap. So as we've said, what we haven't included in here, albeit we've referenced it in general, but we've caveated it, is that once this goes in, yes, you're getting a tenant, yeah, you get 250 jobs in a hangar, but because of that infrastructure cost, it helps close that viability gap. So the idea is, and the letters of intent that we talked about, are that these other businesses will build their own hangars because all of a sudden the viability gap closes.
Okay. So we're not going to be in a situation 2-3 years down the line where we're back in the reports and we have to inject another grant to keep them 250 jobs. I think that's...
No, to keep the jobs. I mean, I'm not going to say, by the way, we don't get another investment that says we want to create 500 jobs, but they want a grant from us to be able to build a facility. Like I said, in the same way that could happen in Redcar or Middlesbrough, we would still evaluate that against all the other projects.
Is there any good examples of the regional airports? It's not Doncaster, is it Sheffield?
Sheffield,
yeah. Other areas that are ahead of us in its journey in terms of going freight to subsidise the commercial side of flights?
Look, the only really major cargo airport, the types of cargo that we do, is East Midlands Airport, which is obviously a hugely successful airport, has been for a long time. But then there's also a difference here that this isn't just about cargo. The businesses that want to come here do a lot of kind of like engineering work as well. So it's operations, it's maintenance, there's a whole lot of stuff that goes on the planes, all well-paid jobs as well. So there's that whole mix, it's not just about the cargo stuff.
What about UK defence stuff? Many of these hangars going to be
one
through that?
as we've said publicly, one of them is helps unlock the Dragon investment. We've just won a £170 million contract from the government, and they've already built second hangar because of the investment we've been able to put into the airport. This is now a third. You know, we'd love for them to do even more here, so that's on top of the other investors that we're talking about as well. Chris?
So I think Stephen made some of the point that I was trying to make earlier, and my reasoning for the rental questions and the assurances that I'd quite like from Gary around that is not for the UK SPF element but for the other element, because in my head that's the point when the TVCA is taking 100% liability, and I'm not going to say that we're going to pass 100% liability. I think we need to seek to lessen that, because if we don't seek to lessen that, it's not in the benefit of the public purse essentially. So I think I'm not suggesting that we reap and gouge people's eyes out, but I'm seeking that we try and lessen the liabilities that the TVCA are taking, while still understanding that there is a gap. But I think the gap should not be 100% sat with TVCA.
Sorry, Brenda's been patient, and I know Mike has been extremely patient.
Okay, thanks. It's actually just to come back to the whole process. So I accept that the time frame was poor. I accept that there weren't the schemes from the local authorities to be successful. However, was there ever a thought about any of the schemes which are ready for up and running in the development corporation areas?
Again, one of the reasons, I might bring Sarah in on this as well more broadly, but one of the reasons we've assessed it as a whole is because there's £42 million worth of capital in for the development corporations as well, so it's more about which funds do you allocate where. So again, we've talked, you know, in effect, UK SPF is 21 million quid. We haven't really talked about the other £80 million that's being signed off. So that's the point you've got to look at it as a whole. So it's, yeah, you've got 6 million in capital here, but there's like 50-60 million pounds of capital over here that's being spent across the region. So what we're just trying to do is collect it into an investment plan. It's almost kind of like our equivalent of the budget, so people can see how all of this interacts is how we're trying to do it. Looks like we could probably do a better job of it, but it looks like that's how we're trying to do it. Mike, you've been mega patient.
Yeah, it was more of a technical point. Sorry, Gary, I'm going to ask you to be a bit more simple in terms of the financial elements of this, because I think it's been lost a little bit in that discussion around income over grant and UK SPF over loan. So there's two elements to this decision, isn't there? There's the UK SPF grant allocation, which is a grant. We are choosing to use the borrowing as a grant, but there is a choice that it can be. Other projects do. We could use our PWLB borrowing to provide a loan to the entity, and the income for servicing the debt. There is a possibility that could come back, but then that takes away the income profit from the airport, isn't it?
Yes.
So I was a bit worried that we were getting confused. Two pots of money we're talking about. It's not a grant. The UK SPF is a grant. We are choosing to borrow and to provide the borrowing as a grant to the airport. The airport will then get profit from the
tenants.
So we're choosing to allow the airport to keep the profit.
Yeah.
We could choose to do something. I'm not suggesting that we should do that, but it's just to be clear.
No, that's absolutely right. Which is why I keep, again, you've explained it better than I did, which is why I use the example of another business elsewhere that wants a warehouse. You wouldn't give them a grant to build a new warehouse and then take all of the rent from them. So that's the whole point. It's a grant to that organisation, and what the finance team here do, which is set out in these papers, but also our budget, MTFP, our quarterly update here, is how do we manage our internal finances either through borrowing or grant, so that we can deliver the whole programme of what TVCA is trying to deliver. And then obviously where we can source external, whether it's SPF or IZs or anything else that comes down the line, then obviously we'll plug that in rather than use our own money, our own borrowing, our own gain share, or whatever we have locally. But yeah, that explains it well.
But the project still goes ahead irrespective of where the income goes to. Yeah, so if the choice is where the income goes doesn't affect the actual delivery, because we're talking about viability.
Yeah.
Gap funding is the grant, effectively, isn't it?
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, it's well articulated. I suppose everybody's got anything else to say on anything else, like the IZ or all the other money. Sorry, Bob.
The Tees Valley Investment Zone, obviously the digital part of the Tees Valley Investment Zone, obviously it's I'm assuming it just say it's right across the Tees Valley, but as 35% of the digital sector is actually based in Stockton, how will Stockton benefit from the investment zone in the digital sector?
So if you I'm going to explain this, and I'm definitely going to look to Sarah to double check that this is right, because I've asked for this to be broken down in very layman's terms for me as well. So there is a capital element of the investment zone, which I think is about 42, 43 million pounds. Is that right, Sarah? Yeah, that's a nod. That's good. The capital amount, the 42 million pounds, is specifically for Middlesbrough and Hartlepool, of the 80 million pounds that we're getting. The IZ is Tees Valley wide, so the rest of the money is spent region-wide in supporting businesses and other opportunities in the digital sector. So I just want to, I don't know if that answers his question, but just to be clear, there are specific elements that are going to Middlesbrough and Hartlepool because that's how it's been designed with government, and then the rest is kind of not free for all, but is for the whole of the Tees Valley to kind of share in and be able to get. And obviously this is just the first allocation because we've already got notification that this is the first 80 million, but actually there's another 80 million to come at the back end of that, which again takes us all the way back to longer term pipelines over the next kind of 10 years as this money starts to drop in. Have I said anything incorrectly there, Sarah? Or is that right? Is there anything you want to add? Of course you can, absolutely.
I don't know if it's working.
Hello, it is. So government, we've been pushing this with government and they were very clear there had to be two very defined cluster areas because they want to see growth really, really quickly. However, I do think that in the next second half of the IZ, we will confidently be able to make the case that actually we've really invested in the infrastructure in those cluster areas and actually the cluster's growing and therefore we could potentially argue to take that wider, but it was a very clear government request that we had to focus on those two physical areas.
Just a bit of a pity that 35% of the digital sector is actually based in Stockton. The companies that are in the digital sector are actually based in Stockton. That they can't benefit from the first part of the investment zone.
Yeah, and again it goes back to the point, Bob, and I know we've been speaking at length about this, and I know Stockton have been pushing this really hard and very successfully over the last couple of years actually, but again it's keep going back to the point, yes it would be nice, but there's more money than IZs and there's a long conversation already starting with Stockton about how we finance the ambitions that Stockton have both in the digital sector and in the in your kind of health and social care zone as well. So again, yes, we're acutely aware of that and hopefully the discussions that we're having continue because it would be an exciting project to deliver. It just couldn't get captured within the IZs in the way that government wanted us to be able to capture it. Having said that, there's still £38 million of the IZs that is absolutely available for schemes right across the Tees Valley and business support and all of those set out in the paper.
And the guidelines out to how you actually apply for that 38 million.
Sarah, do you want to just explain how, I mean in broad terms, how the IZ money is going to be kind of available and allocated, please?
Yeah, also just to confirm, the infrastructure physical cluster investment is 32 million of the 80. So we've agreed a programme with government, so that's if accepted today into our investment plan, that's then delegated to us locally to manage. There's some very clear high-level pillars of support that we need to provide, which includes skills support, business support, which are available to any business in Tees Valley or coming into Tees Valley. We can also look at inward investment in that. So this Cabinet will be the decision-making body on that investment plan programme. So accepting that into the investment plan today means we would manage that through our normal assurance framework. The additional point that was requested by government that this needs to be business-led, so the business board also provide an additional level of oversight on any projects that come forward. Any capital projects will require a full business case and assessment.
Chris?
Just before I go back to the airport, on the investment zone business rate retention, so I think we've talked quite a bit about process and stuff, but how are we going to ensure that the billing authority areas and the link up there happens? Is there going to be some sort of formal arrangement that we need to outline and make sure that that's properly in place? Because I think there's quite an exciting opportunity, but I want to make sure that it works for everyone essentially. My other sort of question is, there is a reference to the Marketing Competitions Authority. I'm just wondering what happens if they came back with saying that it's not a viable option for the other investment.
And Sarah could do both of those, I think, because you have the one that's been dealing with it.
So on the business rate retention, TVCA will need to agree with Hartlepool Borough Council and Middlesbrough Borough Council an MOU, and I believe conversations have begun on that. So, and also we've set out in the papers the kind of process for decision making. So we'll need to agree the parameters of that, but we do have to obviously keep in line with what government's asking us to do. Yeah, is the CMA a question about the infrastructure investment on the north side of the airport? Yeah. So any investment over £10 million has to be referred to the Competitive Markets Authority. They are very thorough. You provide the full business case and all of the detail and any additional detail that they ask for. They provide a report. We've done one on an investment in Hartlepool, and we've done two actually on investment in Hartlepool recently. They provide a report which sets out any recommendations, so they don't give a clear yes or no, but what they will do is assess whether that is a lawful subsidy due to a market failure being evidenced.
It's a lawful subsidy. They give an opinion, and then they have a discussion with us. It's an embargo discussion just before their report is published, and then they publish a report as to their views on that proposal. We do have external lawyers who are advising us on the subsidy aspect. So if it is not a lawful subsidy, it will not be permitted. So we need to go through that process in order to allow that money to be allocated.
I think if I may add to that also, part of that process is that you actually have an initial discussion with them about the project, so they will flag quite early. They wouldn't want to take a referral if they're saying now that is not an appropriate project.
Yeah. So we've been given an indication, but it's fair to say that a formal decision hasn't been taken because you can't until.
Yeah. Yes.
Question. Anything else? Chris?
Yep. So I really want to seek a bit more assurance, because essentially I'm not seeking to try and unfairly disadvantage the airport, but I am seeking to try and make sure that we are achieving best value for money on public spend. And what I'm not quite assured on at this point still is that we are talking about the airport being able to make profit, but there should be some level that we are able to damage limited the liability that we are taking on. I fully accept the grant part, that's to one side, but the borrowing that the organisation is taking on is a different story. And I think there should be some level.
Yeah, I think let's go back around this though, Chris. Yeah. It's the same as lots of other projects that we give grant funding to. We've given grant funding to projects in Middlesbrough, I mean all 5 local authority areas to be frank, where we've used borrowing to do that, and we wouldn't impose upon a private body or the council where we're giving councils money for you to share the income from the investment that you've then made. It's just not, you just wouldn't do that. So the grant is the grant to the airport, and again, the team here financially manage the internals of that, and I know to be fair, a few of the leaders have asked some pretty rigorous questions to make sure that, okay, that additional borrowing, does that have impacts on other projects that we want to be delivering across the region? And that's where Gary has to justify himself to all of us to make sure that that additional borrowing doesn't mean that other projects or downline doesn't happen. So, one, I think it would be treating the airport unfairly. Two, we have a business plan that we've also adopted that is trying to bring the airport back into sustainable viability rather than just one-off years of profit and then going down and then up and down and up and down. And then also, thirdly, it is. I've got to go back to this point that it is also about the specific investment itself. So we've given information about the wider business plan. We've got the business plan, we obviously share that anyway. We talked about the impact on the airport, but the submission here isn't about the airport. The indirect benefit of it is the airport is going to make some rent. But the direct part of the investment plan refresh is there is infrastructure that goes in to build a hangar that's going to create 250 jobs for the business and another business, and there are going to be more hangars on the way. So again, it goes back to that point that if you did it in Middlesbrough town centre, you would still do it, and then you wouldn't try and claw back some of that grant from the rent from an investor who was trying to do it in the town centre. It's the same thing. But I do get where you're coming from, but like I say, it draws those parallels with things like TSAM and others. And again, if we want to do it the same way as TSAM, not that Stephen would accept this, but I tell you, we could do it and take the business rates from Darlington Council and bring that back to TVCA to repay it. I mean, but we're quite relaxed in that, well, if Darlington Council makes some extra business rates and we create some jobs, then it's still staying within the public sector. It's just not necessarily being captured by TVCA the same way it was with TSAM. Okay. Right. Is there anything else? Sorry? Just want to make sure there's nothing else. And so if there isn't anything else, we'll move to a vote then. People happy to accept the recommendations in the paper?
So could I just clarify? So, yes, I am, but with a caveat that the process that we've outlined has been flawed, if you like, or whatever adjective you'd like to use, and that we wouldn't be in this position again because we're going to make the future more robust.
Well, absolutely, we've definitely noted that
But if
going
that's
forward it has to
put
be.
in the decision, rather than us just accepting.
And for transparency, the minutes as well. I
Yeah,
think
absolutely.
crucial that we get those.
Oh, sorry, sorry, Brenda, you said yes, but yeah, people have to agree with that?
Yes.
Yeah, I only ask because it's an investment plan decision, so it needs to be unanimous, otherwise Emma's going to start kicking me to find out whether everybody's actually voted for it, so, yep. Right, very good. Next, we move on to the adult education budget. Taking into account Chris's point, we have to review the process going
Yeah,
forward.
can I just check that point? And we will go back, but we do publish the allocations once the approval's been made. But I will check what authorities do, but because it's a procurement process, and we're asking, it's just like any other procurement process, we don't publish the names of recipients until that's concluded. As soon as an approval is given at this meeting, we do publish it, but I will check whether or not combined authorities do it differently.
As soon as this is approved, if approved.
We do publish it.
But it's a good point. I do think it's worth checking
Yeah,
whether
well,
the combined
yeah.
authorities publish the procurement process in advance of the decision.
Yeah, certainly will do.
Was there?
I think there's a slight difference in that other combined authorities grant fund directly without a procurement process.
That would be right. Yeah, so they're not going through procurement process. We'll check that point, but that might be the difference. Having said that, we have the papers presented. We do have a confidential item, which is the allocations, because they haven't been agreed yet. On the basis they're agreed, that will become public after the meeting. But just to say, we'll deal with it in this meeting in the way that we always have, and we'll come back to you, Chris, and the rest of the cabinet, just to double check that, you know, whether we should be publishing these in advance. But it may be Sarah's point about procurement. So on that basis, the appendices is still confidential. So we can talk about the paper as much as you like. If you want to talk about anything within the appendices or the allocations, we'll keep it public as much as we can, but we would at that stage have to remove the press and public from the meeting.
It's a cabinet decision, obviously, to exclude the press and the public. The advice is that the allocation should be confidential for the reasons we've outlined, but that is a cabinet decision.
I don't know what you might prefer not to go against legal advice. So, has
Just
anybody got any comments or questions on the AAB? Education budget allocations? Stephen?
I think this paper also exemplifies where we've got to in terms of having to make a decision, and we've only had some information 2 days ago, I think it was. I know we had the briefing early doors where we saw the covering report. So that was incomplete. It was reissued fairly soon afterwards, but we didn't then get the list of the allocations some days. So those came out when the papers were made public. And I know a request was made to have more information, and that was supplied, but that was only a couple of days ago. So as I understand it, we're in a position where we do need to make a decision today because of timescales, but we've not really had a chance to look and understand, probably still don't fully understand, how some of the grants have been allocated across the varying bodies. I don't know the details of it because it's in part 3, but there are some oddities, I thought, in terms of the spreadsheet that in a kind of way don't make sense, but there may be underlying reasons for it, but there's no explanation that's been supplied about why institution A has got this percentage of what they've asked for and why another institution has received a lesser percentage. So it makes it very difficult to understand.
I also think part of this meeting is that, Stephen, so I would encourage you, if you want to get into that I'm sure all the answers are available. So don't not get into it. We'll have to exclude the public, but if you want to understand that breakdown and how it's arrived at, I think it's important you're able to ask the questions that you want to ask. So maybe we keep part of your question in public first, and if you want to dive into that, I would encourage you to get the answers that you want and you're seeking from the officers who can provide it.
The point I'm making is that there could have been a lot more information around the rationale behind it presented as part of the papers, even if it was confidential. Because otherwise we're coming to this meeting not really knowing and understanding what the reasons were about how it's being allocated. It's not that I'm suggesting it could be wrong, it's just that...
Yeah, absolutely. Sarah, do you want to...
And I suppose the point I'm making, we've been asked to make a decision today, and I can't honestly say that we've had all the information to fully understand rationale.
Sarah?
Okay, so I think there's 2 points. The first is that we have the procurement only closed possibly 3 or 4 weeks ago, and this has been a formal open procurement process with a very clear evaluation criteria and a number of people involved in that process, and I have one of those people here today so we can dig into it if you'd like to. The reason we wanted to bring it to this cabinet is because we've listened to the providers, and in previous years these decisions have been brought to later cabinets, which has caused significant cash flow issues for those providers, and this is one of the main reasons that we're trying to look at doing this slightly differently in future. So again, we can consider putting more information into future reports, absolutely take that point. However, the information is available for us to talk through with you today. It has been a proper procurement process, not just a kind of funding process. So all of the records are there of those evaluations that have been undertaken by a number of officers, and if Cabinet would like those, we can share those. Can we, Emma? You will tell me if we can.
We need to see the process.
Yeah. So I think we're happy between Jackie and I to take any specific questions on any of the allocations.
And I think it also goes to the point, keep coming back on this as a bit of a theme, and I know we've talked about this informally as well, is we also want to move forward our processes for next year. So the idea is instead of it being March, it's sign off here in December, but as well there are some changes that we all want to make to just make the delivery of what we're trying to achieve across the region better. I think it's a bit like the pipeline. I've already said to many of you around here, we need some meetings in the diary in April to start that process, to look at how we're funding providers, the data we need, the outcomes that we expect, the types of things we're funding, and we need to get together to agree that, so that when we go out for the procurement, it's clear to everybody what the process is, why we're doing it, what we're doing it, and we can allocate it in December instead of March. So I think that's a fair point. Oh.
Yeah, I think what we at the advisory panel, education employment skills advisory panel, because this was a one-year procurement, obviously that could go out quite early, because obviously the financial year for colleges and everybody starts in August. But what we've said for the next 12 months is to look at the framework to see how we can do it differently, the procurement, and look at how the combined authorities do their adult education and monies. Just make it hopefully after this year we might get a multi-year settlement for it. So therefore we should be able to get a better scheme of things on the procurement going forward over the next till we have to go up for procurement for the next year. Talk to the colleges and obviously the local authorities and the providers of training and skills.
It's a great point, Bob, and particularly that multi-year settlement helps in the same way it will with UKSPF, to be fair. So no, that's a point well made. Stephen, did you want to say something? Or?
I think that the point isn't so much the point is what we'd have to do today, but it's the fact that we're told about it now, but I think what we're saying is if we don't make a decision today, we're going to cause huge problems for those providers, and that's the last thing we need to do. So we absolutely need to see that information long before today. Just so we can settle ourselves.
We can do that in future, absolutely.
And that's the point, we absolutely must, because otherwise we'll be back and make a decision that we don't really understand whether it's the right decision.
Yeah.
I think we need to be more fundamental, Stephen, I'll repeat myself, I think we need a more fundamental kind of sit down and kind of say, right, now we've done this in April, we've done adult education budget for a few years now, is it achieving the outcomes that we actually want? Are we getting the data back from the providers that is actually helping us inform our decisions? What levers do we have to make sure they're delivering what we know needs to be delivered within the region? So I think if we can start almost with some, like, probably not a blank piece of paper, but in effect, the team coming in with, here are all the different ways that you can do this. Here's what goes on as best practice across the country. This is what we think is going to work, and here are some options. Then we've just got to come to an agreement about a way forward, and then make sure that everybody's involved in that process much more closely, so we can get to a December timeline for sign-off. So I think we're all aggressively agreeing with each other, Stephen. I think we accept that. But I do come back to the point, if you don't mind. So Chris, were you going to say something?
No.
It was just at this point, just because you've raised it, Stephen, about kind of some things you've got in the appendices. I mean, I would like us at some point to go into private session to talk about that, because I'd rather leaders. I appreciate you talk about process and whether you did or didn't know this information, but the fact that you've raised some questions, which again may be perfectly fine, but I'm sure are valid questions. I'd rather you ask those questions than not ask them, and I'm sure the officers would be more than happy to kind of take you through those allocations and why it's come out. Like I say, going forward, we can make it better, open it up, get everybody involved much earlier. But I think before we end this and go to a vote, I'd like to do that just to make sure you're comfortable with what's in the allocation.
May I ask a question?
First. Go on, Sarah.
Is there an impact when the local authorities are also part of that procurement in terms of how much information we can share before it's concluded?
That's a good question. I mean, let's pick that up outside of the meeting and figure that out. I don't know. Possibly, probably. Yeah, we'll see. But irrespective, strategically, the cabinet need to be involved in setting that whole agenda. So we're going to have to figure out how we manage that process, as given, as you've rightly said, the councils are also bidders on this process as well. That's also a fair point. Chris?
Yep, it's just a sort of, because I've apparently now sat and read combined 40 minutes going out my ears, but the others seem to produce a proper annual report which goes at the same time, and then at the same time produce an evaluation independently ran of the state of adult skills in the area, and actually those two things, when you combine them together, then alongside what we're actually funding, it makes the entire thing so much better. So I think that's the sort of thing that we need to move towards, isn't it? Rather than because I'm quite a bit worried that we are going to start to have issues more and more with the public sector not being able to hire because the people aren't trained at the right level. But where are those voices coming from? How do we engage the NHS, for example? How do we engage schools and all that sort of stuff? We need to make sure that we get that clear picture.
Yes. And that's the intention through this collaboration. We've done quite a big skills analysis piece of work, and I think we need to start with that, and then go from there. I think that's a good suggestion.
Sounded like you were listening to Sarah then, actually. She's definitely been there. Yeah, definitely been saying the same thing. Right, are there any other questions on just in the public bit? Because I do think that, if you don't mind, Stephen, I would rather you just go through it to give yourself some comfort on the questions that you've got with the potential bit, if that's okay. So I'm happy to propose exclusion of the public and prep for a period of time. Brenda will second that. Can we agree that? Yeah. If you don't mind, there may be a little bit afterwards if people want to stick around. It's up to you. And we'll invite you back in just when we've got this.